My name is Luke Charlee. I'm the Executive Director of Solar Washington, and I'm really excited for this webinar because we've had a lot of interest and a great turnout, and I'm really excited to spend more time with these amazing humans that have been a big part of Solar Washington. We're a huge part of our Solar Summit last year, and just some of my favorite people. If you're not super familiar with Solar Washington, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization working to advance solar energy in Washington state. And what makes us a little bit unique is that we're an association that goes across the board from energy equipment manufacturers, system integrators, distributors, dealers, designers, installers, consultants, students, teachers, homeowners, and just solar enthusiasts in general. Through education and community involvement, we promote the development and effective use of solar energy and its contribution to the economic, environmental, and social fabric of Washington state. As always, we want to thank all our members. We're a membership organization, and our volunteers for making this possible, including our amazing speakers today are all volunteering their time. We very much appreciate that. And I like to tease our next webinar in April on Friday the 17th, also at the noon hour. We are going to be having Dever, who is also one of our speakers today, so you'll find out a little bit about her here in just a moment. She's going to be speaking about leasing land for solar. A lot more information to come. That's just kind of our tease for right now. You can check our socials, and our newsletter will come out next week with a lot more information on that. And so finally, I'm going to hand it off to our speakers and let them introduce themselves. Thank you again, ladies, for your time and your contribution, and the floor is yours.
Well, I guess I'll go first since I'm first on this slide. My name is Nora Hawkins. I'm the interim director of our energy policy office at the Department of Commerce, which houses our state energy office. And really grateful that I get to be here with Charlee and Dever, who are experts in the energy world and also people I consider my friends, and really grateful that all three of us got to be on the Solar Washington board together. We're no longer board members, but it's really fun to be having a reunion tour today with both of them, and grateful to get to be here. I'll pass it to you, Charlee.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Hi, you guys. My name is Charlee. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a policy associate with the Northwest Energy Coalition, or NWEC. We are a small regional clean energy policy advocacy nonprofit in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. I primarily work in Washington and a little bit in Oregon too. And like Nora said, very excited to be here and talk about the legislative session. And I'll pass to you, Dever.
Thank you both. And I'm Dever Haffner-Ratliffe. I work full-time at a small electric public utility district in Southwest Washington, but then also have a consumer-focused solar consulting business. Lots of background that we'll learn more about if you attend the April webinar as well. And also Charlee, Nora are fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, so, oh, and by the way, if you guys want to introduce yourselves in the chat by just putting your name and if you're with any particular group or maybe where you're located, please feel free. There's not so many that we can't do full introductions, but I think it might make more sense to do in the chat, and then we can see where you guys are coming from too. So before diving into all the specifics of what happened in the legislative session, I wanted to walk you through how to find a bill, just in case any of these bills we're talking about are of interest and you want to look up more information later, or for next year as well. So let me share my screen, and can you guys see this? Nods. Okay, good. Okay, so very quickly, how to find a bill. It's very simple if you know what the bill number is, because the legislature just has a normal little lookup box here. Type in your bill number, hit search, it'll come up. And if it probably looks familiar if you regularly work in the legislature, it can kind of look confusing if you don't. But the main parts that I'm always looking for if I'm looking at a new bill is who are the main sponsors, and then you can look at the full history of the bill and like all the steps it went through and the different dates, but usually if you just scroll down to the bottom here, it has the most relevant documents, including the bill as filed originally, and then probably what's most important at this point is looking at the bill as it had passed the legislature. and the fiscal note, if it has one. They don't all have a fiscal note. The other interesting thing that you might want to look at if you're looking for specific like testifiers or what different groups or legislators your legislator had to say if they spoke is checking out the videos on TVW, which is just the recording of the hearings in which the bill was heard. Um, so that's if you know the bill number. Now let's go back. If you don't know the bill number, that's always a little bit trickier, but the legislature makes it pretty easy with this hyperlink of more ways to find bills. And you can do, this is usually where I'll direct people to if they kind of want to just check out like generally what are energy bills? What are the energy bills that are coming up? So you can search bills by topic. And luckily, energy and environment are big enough topics that they have their own subheadings. They're not too far from the top. Yeah. So energy, these are all the bills in this biennium that were introduced, specifically tagged as energy. Scroll down, you get into different environmental ones. But not every single bill that's related to energy or that you might be looking at always pops up and is flagged in this category. So I'll often, for example, if I'm looking for an energy bill that is related to low income bill assistance, and it wasn't in there, then you can search for, I'll try L for low income, do the classic control F and okay, cool, low income is a category and kind of scroll through and I see, okay, low income energy assistance here, statewide low income energy assistance here. So there are different ways to kind of get at the topics you're interested in if you don't know exactly the bill number or exactly what you're looking for, but you have the general topic. Solar does not have its own category, but generally under energy, or you can look at if there's a solar program you know is likely going to be implemented at Commerce. Commerce is its own category, and you can start tailoring it that way too. So that's the quick overview of how to find the bill. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. Okay, sweet. So now that you have that information, let's get into what happened specifically in this legislative session. The disclaimer that we wanted to make is neither Nora, Dever, or myself are attorneys. So we're going to do our best to explain bills in layman terms and based off of our individual perspectives, unless we otherwise specify that like this is the perspective of the Department of Commerce or of NWEC, or of Solar Quote Check. So this year was what's called a short legislative session. There are short sessions and long sessions in Washington. The short session ran 9 weeks from January 12th to March 12th, so just ended a couple of weeks ago exactly. It's been a hybrid opportunity for, it has had hybrid opportunities for engagement since the pandemic started in 2020. That was the same this year, so it made it a little bit more accessible for a lot of folks around the state to engage in Olympia. Going into this year's legislative session, you guys are probably aware that there were some pretty significant headwinds, including the one that comes to mind most for most people is the state's budget shortfall. This legislative biennium, 2025 through 2027, there are different numbers, kind of different sources will say, but this biennium is looking at a near $2 billion budget shortfall, and then some projections looking into the next biennium and through the end of it say that it can climb as high as 10 or $12 billion. And Washington's not alone. We are one of the several states that are facing budget shortfalls, including our neighbors in Oregon. But that really set the tone for what bills are more likely to pass in a session like this. They are going to have to be maybe more policy solution focused and not necessarily have a huge fiscal or any fiscal impact. So you'll see that in the bills that we're going to talk about. The two additional headwinds or challenges I wanted to point out to you guys was this is the second year for our new governor, Governor Ferguson. Former Governor Inslee's top priority, as many of us know, was climate. Like climate energy was his thing. And he really pushed for climate and clean energy bills to get to his desk and then to sign them and get them off his desk. Governor Ferguson also cares about these issues, but it's not the same level of priority for him as it was for the climate governor in the country, which makes sense. So that just means there's more education and advocacy on all of our ends to make sure that the right bills get to his desk and that he signs them. And then the last headwind was that as we walked into January with this newer, we have a newer landscape in the state where Washington's clean energy policies and projects are being put up against energy reliability and the challenges associated with that, as well as energy affordability, which wasn't unexpected, but we did end up seeing attempts to weaken clean energy laws in this session, for example, because of that kind of nexus of challenges and conflicting interests. So we'll likely see that come up in future sessions as well, and that will impact the solar landscape. So that's the high level context of how we were starting out with session, and now we'll walk through some of the bills that made it all the way through. And I think now I turn it over to Nora or Dever to talk about 2296.
I think it's me unless Nora says otherwise. Hearing nothing from Nora. Hi, everyone. This is Dever. So House Bill 2296 is really the bill that had the strongest correlation to consumer-owned solar in Washington state this year. And the way that it started and the way that it came out are very, very different. So as a quick overview, this bill originally proposed what's known as balcony solar, where you plug the solar and maybe a battery directly into an outlet at your home, apartment, whatever the situation may be, and that feeds and offsets your electricity. The other technology the bill was looking to introduce is commonly referred to as a meter collar, where instead of having to interconnect the solar through the primary electrical or secondary electrical panel, it can actually be connected on the meter base behind the utility meter. Lots of reasons that folks want to see that type of technology more prevalent. Right now, there's nothing in Washington state that prohibits it, but the legislation would have made it clear that this was allowed and that utilities had to allow it. So interesting progression on this bill. There was concerns from a lot of utilities about safety. There's rules and laws about removing a utility meter, or what if there's solar that's backfeeding the grid and the utility doesn't know about it. Those were concerns that I think just often come up anytime there's a new technology or a new interconnection method brought up. But the other piece of it is just general electrical and fire safety. So the Department of Labor and Industries actually was fairly concerned about this bill and testified as such for a couple of reasons. One being they didn't want electricians working on a building or a home to not realize that the lines were energized, regardless of if they flipped a breaker. And then the other piece of it is electrical code. So as many of you probably know, we refer to our little plugs as outlets, and that out part of the word is pretty key because that word really specifies what they're designed and what they're tested to do, which is put electricity out to power things. They aren't tested or designed to allow electricity in. We don't really have that technology approved under electrical code in the US and or Washington. And sorry that my lighting keeps adjusting. So as a result of that, it had some back and forth. A lot of folks thought we were kind of on the right page in terms of the meter collaring was going to be allowed. There were going to be rules about who could install those meter collars and when, and the utility at least having to be notified. It did take the balcony style solar out of the equation. But then at the last minute, it might have even been the same day it was voted on, the bill completely changed. I myself thought I had opened the wrong bill and had to check 3 times. The way that the bill passed doesn't have anything to do with solar interconnection methodology or options anymore. Now it essentially allows investor-owned utilities to do on-bill financing for certain energy efficiency and energy conservation projects. This was allowed because of the title. If a subject change or an amendment fits under the title, and this had a pretty broad title, that was how it was allowed under the rules. But it just means that this alternative interconnection method that people had really been, I know a lot of people had really been hoping for, isn't prohibited, but there's no clear rule that says it's allowed at this time. And then Nora, I think you had stuff to add on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Dever. I second everything Dever said. This is a really interesting bill to watch how it evolved throughout the course of session. I know probably many Solar Washington members are interested in plug-in solar or balcony solar, as it's called. We've seen several other states in the country pursuing legislation on plug-in or balcony solar. There's an important equity framing here, which is if you are a renter, if you don't own your home, if you live in a multifamily affordable housing building or apartment building, how do you access solar? Can you install a portable solar device and use it to generate electricity and offset your electric bill? So there's definitely an interesting and important need there. But as Dever said, this really became down, I think, to a safety issue, particularly for our Department of Labor and Industries around wiring in people's homes or residences. Could it cause a fire if you're having those two-way power flows? So definitely a lot more work needed on this topic. I think it's something we'll see come back up again. Maybe taking different forms, but there is a really important safety consideration here. I think on meter collars, as Deborah noted, it's less of a safety issue, but it's more kind of how does it work and what are the rules around it. It is an important equity consideration as well, because it particularly supports people who live in older homes and residences in being able to electrify, EV charging, solar, et cetera, without having to upgrade their electric panel. So important opportunities, more policy discussions to have, but excited to see where both of those bills go. And also, I'll just say, we're all, I think, here because we care a lot about solar access. And so how do we support renters with solar? And another opportunity, of course, that's probably familiar to a lot of folks is community solar. So that is really being done on a case-by-case basis by utilities, but another opportunity around expanding solar access. Charlie, was there anything? Oh, Dever, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to also add, if you're someone who is in a rental situation and you want solar, you could always do the truly mobile solar and battery storage that you would use for like car camping or something, and you can just plug individual electronics and appliances into it. So there are workarounds; they just don't tie directly into your.
And no, I didn't have anything to add on this one. Okay, quick pause, and then I'll jump to Senate Bill 5982. So 5982 has a long title name, updating provisions for consumer-owned utilities, including port districts and affected market customers under CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act. In short, my one sentence summary is that this bill closes a loophole in CETA, which is Washington's big clean energy law, that would allow for large loads, including, and for example, data centers, to use natural gas generated at port districts. So the quick step back, CETA, Clean Energy Transformation Act, in case you do not know, it is Washington's landmark clean energy law. It says that electric utilities, they can't use coal after 2025, last year. They must be 80% clean or carbon neutral by 2030, and they must be 100% clean by 2045. And there are some off-ramps for reliability and affordability crises and some flexibility for utilities to achieve this, but it's clear that when the state says it wants clean energy through the Clean Energy Transformation Act, that it means clean. And as you might be aware, data centers are posing new challenges in what we thought we knew about achieving CETA's 2030 mandate. So under CETA, it wasn't clear whether port districts that may generate electricity within their territory using natural gas was covered under CETA. And large load companies were noticing that. So that meant that they could potentially make an agreement with the port district to be served by some of their electricity generated by or from natural gas. So this bill was clarified, or what it does is clarify that no, that's not an allowed use. Under CETA, the port districts can't generate electricity with gas and serve large loads, and port districts must also be compliant with CETA's clean energy standards. This one's waiting to be signed right now, but it moved pretty smoothly through the legislature. So it not as directly related to solar specifically, but it was a large conversation in the legislature given how the clean energy landscape in Washington is kind of shifting to have this consideration of data centers and larger loads. So then relatedly, I'm going to jump to the next bill, which is House Bill 2367. This one is, so remember how I just said that CETA says that electric utilities can't use coal anymore after 2025, last year. Well, last year, Washington had one remaining coal plant open, the Centralia plant down in southwestern Washington, which was scheduled to fully retire on December 31st of last year, so almost exactly 3 months ago. However, in mid-December, so a couple weeks before it was planned to shut down, the federal administration issued an emergency order that required the plant to continue operating beyond its legal shutdown date by invoking, this is getting technical, but in case you're curious, by invoking Section 202C of the Federal Power Act, which that just empowers the Federal Power Act, or Section 202C of it, empowers the federal government to order temporary emergency operations of power plants to ensure grid reliability. So what the federal government said was, we think there's a reliability crisis in Washington. There's a risk of blackouts or brownouts. So we're gonna take this power under Section 202C of the Federal Power Act and say that coal plant that was going to shut down needs to keep operating through mid-March, and then we'll have an opportunity to try to extend that timeline, which they have. The same thing has happened to other coal plants across the country in the last few months. So there are ongoing challenges to these orders. And in light of having our state's coal plant still temporarily operational, there was this rush then in the legislative session to create a bill that would make sure that the coal plant would not only have to comply with CETA moving forward as it operates temporarily, and other state environmental laws, but that it also is going to remove special tax exemptions that the plant was given previously. There's a lot more that I can say on the detail and the history of it for the last decade and a half. But the bottom line now is that the bill, as passed, says that it makes it harder for the plant to run, even though it can, under the federal government's emergency order, can run temporarily, because now it's less economically viable for it to run. This bill was signed already by the governor, so it is law. And that's another one, kind of like the last one I was saying, which is just the broader clean energy landscape in Washington. This is where we're at, and this is kind of how the federal government is, how we're grappling with changes on the federal level. Okay.
Can I add one thing on that one really quick, Nora? If folks didn't see, Puget Sound Energy has entered into an agreement with TransAlta to eventually convert that to a natural gas plant, which is allowed a longer runtime than coal. So this doesn't necessarily get in the way or supersede that agreement with Puget Sound Energy. It just basically says that they can't shutter the coal plant if that energy is needed. But there's a comment in the chat actually about how long has it been offline. It's pretty complicated. The energy dynamics in Washington are such that if they decided to run that, I don't think any utility in their right mind would want to purchase that power. So it might end up going through the Bonneville Power Administration, and that'll depend on kind of what their load dynamic is for their customers. So yeah, it's not as simple as flipping a switch. There's a little bit more to it than that, but that coal plant will still be part of the conversation for a while as it transitions to natural gas.
All right.
Taking a minute to get to my mute button here. I think I'm up next to talk about House Bill 1960, which was brought forward by Rep. Bramall. This is a bill that Rep. Bramall has been championing and working on for a couple years now. Essentially, what happens this is a bill about utility scale solar, clean energy, wind projects, etc. So solar, wind, batteries, and beyond are addressed in this bill. And what happens with those technologies is there's accelerated depreciation. So essentially, a solar farm gets built in a community, in a county, And initially, that generates a lot of additional tax revenue for that county because of the cost of that facility, of building that facility. But there is existing law that allows accelerated depreciation. So basically, the value of those facilities decline relatively quickly. And what has happened in Washington is that a lot of communities had solar and wind projects developed and then had additional tax revenue, started projects, and were surprised when suddenly there was a large decline in the tax revenue they were receiving from those projects. And essentially, to continue the work, they had to go to residential households and commercial customers in the county to make up that lost revenue to be able to finish those projects. And so what this bill does is it creates a new tax regime for future projects as well as a certain amount of existing projects. There are projects that can opt in, but it's essentially new projects, generally starting in 2028, would be required to follow this new tax regime, which smooths out the tax revenue. So rather than having a sudden decline in the tax revenue that comes into a local jurisdiction, it smooths out and makes it more predictable. There's also important criteria in terms of counties participating, local jurisdictions participating in this new tax regime. They need to have zoning ordinances, so essentially where and how renewable energy is permitted, need to be supportive of those technologies. So it's both kind of a push and pull to support counties that are hosting these facilities, as well as ensure we can continue to develop clean energy in the state. And I am very happy to say that one of my colleagues, Aaron Peterson, is on the line, and he is our lead at Commerce on this bill, and he is also a new Solar Washington board member. So hopefully you all take advantage and ask him questions about this bill if there are additional questions you have after this webinar. But Deborah, I think maybe you had something to add on this bill.
Yeah, just really quickly, kind of what does this mean for large scale solar in Washington state? Because that's really where this comes into play, is not at the residential level. So with it, there's no retroactive, because a lot of these projects are financially assessed based on the existing tax structure when they're built. But it could change what we see in terms of whether or not projects get refurbished and repowered versus new projects getting built. The utility I work for looked at this bill a lot and could not tell if it actually was going to give the wind projects were involved in a worse or better tax situation if we were to repower. So you could see things like the utilities that have, well, actually all utilities are required to have a clean power program where you pay a little bit more for guaranteed clean power in our state. You could see those programs changing a little bit, how utilities invest in renewable energy, whether or not new projects are developed or old projects are just refurbished to have their lifespan extended. So not necessarily an impact at the residential level, like I said, but could impact the dynamics of clean energy and large scale solar in our state.
There's anything you want to add on the bill, I'll keep moving ahead to the next one, which is Senate Bill 6355 concerning the electric transmission system that was championed by Senator Hunt. This is another bill that we are waiting for the governor to act on. So this has not become law yet. I put a link in the chat if you want to learn more about which bills have been signed by the governor and which bills are on schedule to get signed soon. This is a really exciting and important opportunity in my mind for Washington state, because we know we need a lot more clean energy generation in our state and in our region to achieve our climate goals and our clean energy mandates under the Clean Energy Transformation Act that Charlie was talking about before. And the backbone of our electric system is really transmission. How do we get electrons from one location to another? We need high capacity transmission lines to do that. And this also enables us to access clean, reliable, and often more diverse resources that may be located outside of our state. So it allows us to connect to Midwest wind and things like solar energy resources in the Southwest. So we have electric transmission, obviously, in our state right now. Much of it is operated by the Bonneville Power Administration, which is a federal power marketing entity that is managed by the federal government and is not particularly responsive to states. They really take their mandates at the federal level. They've been a good partner with us and have implemented some recent reforms on transmission, but we know we are not building the transmission our state needs fast enough to have clean, affordable, and reliable electricity. So what this bill would do is it would create the Washington Electric Transmission Authority, which is intended to catalyze the transmission that our state needs. It would start with a study at Commerce to identify transmission corridors within our state that are needed. So where do we need, what transmission lines do we need, and where do they need to connect from one point to another? Then in mid 2027 calendar year, the Transmission Authority would be set up. There would be an executive director hired, a board of directors appointed by the governor and confirmed by the state Senate. And that would really launch the Transmission Authority, which would work collaboratively with utilities and independent developers to identify what transmission work was in progress and what work was needed. It would support those entities, utilities, and independent developers in developing new transmission lines and upgrading existing transmission lines by providing new tools such as financing opportunities to make it more affordable to build transmission, opportunities to support them on permitting, navigating our somewhat complicated state environmental policy act around permitting, how we build clean energy infrastructure in our state, as well as supporting tribal engagement. So it's not really a regulatory authority, it's more an entity that works to catalyze development. And importantly, it does act as a backstop. So if no utilities are interested, no independent developer is interested, the Washington Electric Transmission Authority can become an entity that builds transmission lines. It will always partner with outside entities to operate those transmission lines, and the goal is not to have the state own those facilities long term. It's really to transfer to utilities and independent entities. There's definitely been some questions around this bill. Is it going to address the siting challenges, the permitting challenges that we have in our state? Those are really important questions and a need for additional conversation for sure. This bill evolved a lot over the course of session, and there's a lot more work we need to do. But I think if this bill becomes law, it's an important first step. And I want to pass it over to Deborah to share a little bit about the utility perspective on this bill.
Yeah, thanks. I think in general, utilities are not anti this bill, but are concerned that it won't, like Nora said, won't actually really address the problem of the things that are blocking transmission development in Washington state. There was also a previous version of the bill, which is another interesting legislative story, but we don't have time for today, where they had some exemptions for the state environmental review process and outlined an alternative pathway for tribal consultation and cultural resource consultation. A lot of utilities think that without those exemptions, it's going to be hard because cultural resources and environmental concerns tend to be one of the big blocks for this type of development project. But for what I would hope is obvious reasons, the tribes had very strong concerns about bypassing those processes. So in this version, it doesn't have those things that utilities were really hoping for in terms of where they see the blocks being. But at this point, it's kind of a wait and see. Let's see what Nora and our friends at Commerce can do to help us get more transmission built in the state. And the other thing with it is, I think, relying on the West Tech study to identify those corridors. Sorry if you mentioned that, Nora, and I missed it. Also really helps, because some of the initial concern was that really this was going to focus less on the reliability of the grid and more on individual project development getting interconnected to the grid, which I'm sure there's going to be many mixed opinions about which one of those might be more important or how they interact. But the way it's structured now with using an existing study on where we need corridors also gives utilities a little bit more optimism that this will actually help identify, like Nora said, getting those resources from across the region into our state, not just interconnecting new development.
the from the energy, like the clean energy advocates in the state, I think we're kind of mixed on this. Some of them, including my organization, NWEC, feel, I think, similarly to how you had outlined, Dever, like cautious optimism, and others who are huge proponents of the bill, or like, finally, and we got this. This is the next step. So we'll see where it goes, and I'm also optimistic and hopeful for it. Yeah, keep putting your ideas and questions in the chat. Thanks for engaging with us so far. Okay, so I'll move now to HB 1903. One of, I think, the clean energy policy advocates in the state, one of our takeaways is that this was a pretty solid year for energy justice. There were several bills created by community-based organizations that would benefit the state's most vulnerable populations that passed through the legislature this year. In 1903, from Representative Charlotte Mena was one of them. This bill was led by, if you've heard of Front and Centered, they are a community-based environmental justice nonprofit coalition in Washington, and this was their bill, and they had worked on it for a couple years prior to this. So a recent Commerce report to the legislature estimated that there is about $270 million need to help reduce households' energy burden. And energy burden, it's a term that means the percentage of your income that you are spending on energy costs. So your electric bills, your gas bills, if you happen to do propane or wood, that also counts towards your energy costs and thus energy burden. And national guidance says that the people who spend more than 6% of their income on energy costs are energy burdened. So this bill would establish a program housed in the Department of Commerce with Nora that would discount energy burdened households' monthly bills to help ensure that they aren't paying more than that 6% of their income on energy. The specific design of the monthly bill discount program would then be left to an advisory group, but there is precedent for programs like this in Washington and Oregon because our investor-owned utilities like Puget Sound Energy, Avista, PacifiCorp, and some public utilities like Seattle City Light have monthly bill discount programs. But like how I talked about at the beginning of the session, given the bad budget predicament that we're in, there's no way that the state's going to allocate anything close to the $270 million to this program. But the intent of the bill is to start small and gradually build it over time and direct whatever funds are available to the household with the greatest need throughout the state. So this program is designed to offer regular, expected, like I said, monthly assistance to folks, unlike traditional bill assistance programs like the federal LIHEAP program, if you've heard of that, offers just a one-time lump sum grant or just like credit. So not regular, it's just kind of, to me, it's like a Band-Aid. It's a crisis solution and it's helpful, but it doesn't help you regularly stay on top of your energy bills. And so this one doesn't seem so directly related to solar, right? But we wanted to bring this one to your attention because the overlap between the households that can benefit from this program and then from rooftop and community solar programs, well, there's a significant overlap, right? It's important to inform low-income households of all the options that are available to them to help keep their energy affordable. So currently waiting for this one to be signed by the governor. There's the T is that there's an open question of whether or not he will sign it. We will see. And I don't know if Nora or Deborah, if you want to chime in on 1903. Yeah, go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, just one more tie to the solar side, whether I don't know if we have any like contractors or sales or consultants on here, but if you're selling or considering purchasing or investing in solar and you're on a low income program at your utility, make sure your actual utility rate is being taken into consideration for your metering rate. I know some utilities have a discount on their actual rate for certain households, and so that would be all you get on your net metering return. So as we see how this program develops, if that ends up being a factor, just bear in mind that what's on your utility bill has a big tie to how you can benefit from solar.
And really briefly, I appreciate the great overview that Charlee provided on House Bill 1903. For commerce, this fits in with a broader conversation around energy affordability, how we're kind of changing our electric system to ensure we can meet our clean energy goals and remain affordable. And it's also part of a broader conversation around energy assistance. We have LIHEAP funding from the federal government, as well as the SHEEP program, which is kind of our state companion to LIHEAP, providing energy assistance, credit on electric bills, et cetera. Excitingly, the SHEEP program did receive a increase this budget cycle, so glad to see that there is some additional money going towards low-income energy assistance. 1903 kind of has a different framework in mind, and really grateful we were able to work on that bill throughout session to ensure that it would take into account the existing programs we have in the state to make sure that low-income households really understand their options and, are kind of receiving a streamlined approach, so they're not having to kind of choose between programs. And the important part with that bill is that it wasn't funded in the state budget. As Charlee mentioned, it's a tough budget year, and so there wasn't funding for the energy assistance, and there also wasn't funding for commerce to implement that program. So really eager to see the legislature in future provide funding to hopefully stand up that program. And I can just move right into House Bill 2338, which this is in a great order because this is also a bill broadly trying to address energy burden, but it's also really about comfort and safety in people's homes. So Commerce has an existing an existing weatherization program that is largely funded. There's also some state funding for that program to ensure that people's homes where people live are energy efficient and weatherized and safe places to exist. So they can do things like insulating homes, weatherproofing homes, ensuring windows are, blocking, not leaking a lot of energy out of it, which then in turn helps people lower their electric bills, or it helps people have the same electric bill but have a more comfortable home because they're able to better heat or cool their home. This was an exciting bill that came forward this year, which essentially expands our weatherization program at Commerce by authorizing community scale weatherization projects. And what that means is that the weatherization program currently, before this bill, would go on a home by home basis, and it is accessible to renters. So it's possible for landlords to participate. They essentially have to agree that they're not going to increase the rent for their tenants, but it's a way to kind of upgrade homes, whether it's a renter or a homeowner who is income qualified, to weatherize and make that home more energy efficient. This new bill allows Commerce to look more holistically, work across multiple dwellings and groups of housing units within a community. And the benefit of this is that it lowers per unit costs as well as lowering the admin costs of the program. It's really a very scalable approach and enables Commerce to work more directly with tribal communities, work in mobile home parks, and work throughout overburdened communities where Commerce can take more of a neighborhood approach and work across multiple dwelling spaces. So it's really redefining how we consider projects to be eligible for weatherization, and also really excited to see that there was an increase to the Commerce's weatherization program in the budget, an increase of 11 million, that it will enable us to serve additional households through community partners. And there's also explicit language in the budget that directs Commerce to do a couple pilot projects on 2338 and how these community weatherization projects will work.
All right, and then shifting gears really quickly to bills that would be of more interest to installers, solar industry folks, consultants, rather than individual homeowners, are House Bill 2420 and Senate Bill 6076. House Bill 2420 increases the small works roster contract limits. So just be prepared that there could be more instances of solar projects on public buildings or for public entities going through that small works roster process rather than a public bid process. That bill changes it from where it's currently at, which is a $350,000 limit, to a gradual increase all the way up to $650,000 by 2030, July 2030. So there could be more projects that go through that route for bidding, just be aware. And then the other one is Senate Bill 6076, similar lines. It allows consumer-owned utilities, so public utility districts, municipal utilities like Seattle City Light, Tacoma Power, and co-ops, to have a higher threshold for when their own internal staff are able to complete work for the utility. It's specific to energy systems, so transmission, distribution, storage, and generation. So solar counts under generation, and most cases, which means that there could be opportunities for some of these utilities to do that work, to do those installations themselves in-house, which could create training opportunities, could create consulting opportunities, but wanted to flag those because they have to do with how projects get bid on the public side. And then the last bill we want to talk about really quick did not pass. This is the only bill we're talking about that did not pass this year, and that's House Bill 2515. This uses the term large energy use facilities, but really it's data center. It was data center specific, and it had to do with making sure that the cost of serving data centers electricity was not shifted to the general customer base, that it didn't impact you and your bill if the utility had to make these large investments. There was a lot of pushback from the data center industry. They didn't like having those rules applied to them. Utilities had some concerns because of how it was structured. It would have basically prescribed how some public utilities would have had to do their rates and contracting and policies, which is always a touchy point for publicly owned or public utilities. And so that bill did not make it out this session, but I think we all expect to see it come back in some form or fashion in the future. And I don't know, Nora or Charlie, if you guys want to add anything on that, but I tried to just do a really quick overview so we can save time for questions.
I'll say advocates generally liked 2515. As you can imagine, some were like, it needs to go further, it needs to be stronger. So it got watered down a lot, but it made it very far in session for it being a huge topic. First time introduced in a short session, it almost made it all the way through. So we'll see what comes up next year. And it's kind of a lot of eyeballs on it throughout the country. And there are other Midwestern states particularly that have passed or are looking to pass similar data center regulations in their states.
Just very briefly echo everything that Charlie and Dever said. Commerce was very engaged and interested in this bill. And one of our big questions is, how do we more accurately predict the data center load that we are likely to see coming to Washington State? There's a lot of speculation from data centers about putting in multiple interconnection requests, really trying to find the cheapest place in the country to go. And so it's obviously challenging for us as a state and for our utilities to plan, because we're not sure how much of that load would materialize. So important policy coming up in this bill, and looking forward to continuing that work.
All right, Nora, do you want to do the first round of what we're expecting in the interim and for next session?
Me too. Happy to, Luke, let us know if you're seeing questions that really need to be answered in the chat. Want to make our last few minutes interactive as possible as well. But in terms of what next, I think we hit on a lot of it already. We're going to definitely see more work on data centers coming forward, more work on grid reliability. How are we going to continue to advance siting? There's a lot of important siting and permitting conversations to have in our state, both about clean electricity generation as well as transmission lines, working with communities, working with tribal nations to figure out where do we put the infrastructure we need as a state. Definitely more work to be done on energy affordability. That's a big big topic, as Charlie mentioned, that came up this session, and we will likely continue to see, as well as more conversations to be had about distributed energy resources and supporting solar. I'll note that Commerce currently has a contract with the Washington State Academy of Sciences. Folks hopefully had a chance to hear about that at the last Solar Summit, and hopefully there will be an opportunity for Washington State Academy of Sciences to come back and present their final results of their study at the next Solar Summit, which is really trying to examine what is the value of distributed solar and storage, and creating some tools that different entities, utilities, the Utility and Transportation Commission that regulates our investor-owned utilities, how do they want to value distributed solar on their grid in a way that is equitable and effective? So a lot more to be done next session, but Charlie, what would you like to add?
I don't know if there is much to add. I mean, utility, we didn't talk about wildfire at all, and utility wildfire liability is coming up a lot in conversation in session. Defending the Clean Energy Transformation Act is coming up a lot. So I think we'll see those things too. But I think you covered it pretty well. There's a lot of there's a lot of people up for re-election in the legislature next year, so there's opportunity. That means for all of us to do education for our legislators on the things that we care about. A lot of them will be new to the topics or new to the legislature in general. So, but yeah. Anything that you guys want to add? Any other bills that were, high priority for you, or any thoughts on what we talked about? We have a couple minutes left, and I think it'll go back to Luke to close us out.
And by you, she means our audience.
Yes, anyone and everyone.
Not seeing any questions in the chat or raised hands at this point. If somebody wanted to unmute and ask a question, that'd be fine too. Okay, I think that means you all were very thorough. Thank you so much. Again, just thank you so much for your presentation and sharing your knowledge with us. Absolutely invaluable, and we're going to get this out so people can view the recording and share the information. It really, like I said, I was really looking forward to this, and I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it. Just the last little plug for Solar Washington. As I mentioned, we are a membership organization, and so we rely on our members to both bolster our volunteer corps, but also donate and help spread the word about things. So I'm dropping some links in the chat if you would like to check out our website. Always love it if somebody wants to put $5 or $10 in the donate button to help pay for these webinars. We have lots of volunteer opportunities that we'd love to have you sign up for. And then that very last link in there is to sign up for our newsletter if by chance you don't get that already. All right, I think that's it for us. Thank you so much. Hope to see y'all at our April webinar on leasing land for solar. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.